All right. So if we remember from last time, I said that we'll be discussing some pros and cons of these experimental studies. Makes a good potential essay question. When it comes to, maybe make a list of them or give you a list of them, probably the best thing. And then you guys can write them down. Do that on whenever we get to the last one. We still have 3 and 4 to get through. So, but we saw a couple potential essay ones in the first, looking at the 6 kind of concepts in nutrition that we'll be talking about really all semester. Why we choose what we choose to eat. The experimental studies, the epidemiological studies, maybe comparing and contrasting, and given something that's positive of it, something that is a negative of it. Same thing here with these experimental studies as well. So without further ado, let's get into it here. Experimental studies. These are the best way to figure out one-for-ones. Okay, this factor causing this health outcome. That's the great thing about experimental studies. Okay, they are extremely challenging because we have to navigate how we can control all of those pesky little variables. And they are expensive because of that. But they are great to allow us, again, like I said, to figure out cause and effect. This specific factor causes this specific health outcome. We have a couple different types when it comes to the experimental studies. They are randomized controlled trials, and that's generally what we think about. We randomly divide the participants into different groups, right? Treatment group, control group, and then yada, 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 we run the experiment. There's also this thing called pragmatic trials, and we'll get into all of these here over these next couple of slides. Okay. So we have randomized controlled trials here. And again, as the name would imply, we were dividing everybody randomly into that treatment group, receives the experimental treatment, and the control group, which gets none. I mean, this random placement is important. I'm getting like 1,000 emails, so I apologize if my device keeps going off. The random arrangement of these people just ensures that there is no inherent bias really by the authors of the study. Ensures groups will have similar variables, age, gender, health status. If you were doing a study and you divided everybody up between men and women, well, that's a huge flaw in it, because something could affect men a hell of a lot more than women, or vice versa, and it could really skew the results of your trial, of your experiment, and skew it to you, and that, oh, look at you, you're so smart, or really screw up the whole thing and have it blow up in your face. So that's what the random placement allows. Again, the treatment group receives the treatment, receives the intervention. Okay, we have a control group. Okay, we have that control group, and that allows us to compare that specific intervention. Again, this is what allows us to really see if this treatment is truly effective. In most cases, the control group is not really given nothing, because if they don't receive anything and the other group of individuals do, they're going to figure out right away that they're not in the treatment group. And that could really affect the outcome of the trial in a lot of cases because of that psychosomatic effect. So they're given a placebo. Placebo just means fake treatment. And they can really see if they truly are given, if the group that's given the truly experimental treatment, if that really works. Again, very difficult to do these type of experiments. Again, we're dealing with free living patients, free living people. So there's going to be a lot of variables that are going to be very difficult to control in that. But of course, that's really the only damn way we're going to be able to do these experiments. You can't run an experiment for 6 weeks and have them live in a cubicle in a research facility. It's just not possible. Excuse me. For pragmatic trials, these are pretty interesting. These measure effectiveness of a treatment in the real world setting. What does that mean? Sometimes we can have experimental studies where they are just so strictly regimented, strictly able to control every, or the vast majority, because you're never going to do every single variable, the vast majority of all variables. And some of those things may be controlling specifically what they consume, types of things they drink, type of foods they eat. In those instances, that's not real world, right? You guys just be like, okay, I'm going to be really good, and I'm only going to drink, water or lemon water or something. I'm only going to drink water. Just keep it simple. And your friends call you up and you're like, hey, you want to go out and just have a drink? And you're like, oh, crap. I really wanted to be good and not drink this week. But yeah, sure, I'll have one drink. And you have one, I'll bet one, but it's still one drink. And during this trial, if that individual was not tested with the introduction of alcohol, what does that do to the medication? What does that do to the treatment? So it could really help us to identify any potential shortcomings that happen in the real world, because what happens in the real world can sometimes be a heck of a lot different than what happens in a very controlled lab settings. And some advantages to these type of trials, they're not as stringent. They're not as stringent on who gets in and who is not allowed in these trials. That's a good thing. That's also a drawback of experimental studies. Sometimes you can control the bejesus out of them, and you can really, truly limit who you let in. And by doing that, you can really, it's going to help you from an advantage standpoint and having a much more positive outcome, or at least in your mind, a much more positive outcome. With laxed eligibility, gets me more data, right? With a large number, I have a lot of data points. So that's really good. So I can apply this to a large number of individuals. I can apply this to a large populace. I can, project this out to this is what's going to happen for the state of Missouri, or this is what's going to happen to the southern states. This is what's going to happen to the United States. Okay, so that's the great thing about these type of trials. Less stringent, opens it up, more data points. If we do a large number in experimental, holy smokes, super duper expensive, because you're going to have a number of doctors, number of facilities, money, and money is always difficult to come by. Shortcomings, may only be applicable for the people in the study. Again, there are dietary changes that can happen, that can exist. Even though we may open it up and give it to everybody, there are shortcomings. People lie. Shocking, I know. But people may not be 100% truthful in some of these studies, even though that's what they report. And so it is what it is. And so there are some potential 99.9% have a positive outcome. That 0.1% doesn't. That 0.1% causes death. There you go. And this makes, all these kind of highlights, underlines, stars, bold, all these make great, fantastic multiple choice type questions on an exam. I know I didn't ask it as an essay question, so to put your mind at ease. These human experimental studies are generally going to be double blind. Are there not double blind exam tests? Yes. Are there single blind? Yes. Are double blind the best? Yes. Double blind studies are awesome because they take out bias. They take out that placebo effect, experimentee bias. If you feel like you're not getting the treatment, it's just psychosomatic. If you think you are retrieving the treatment, psychosomatic, and you may not be. Okay, so this helps to avoid that placebo effect. So you really get a true understanding of what that treatment does for the individual. That's the great thing about the double blind. The most important aspect, though, goes to really the person doing the experiment. It takes out your bias. And we always talk about the placebo effect, and to help reduce some of the ability of that psychosomatic response with their beliefs into being an effective or being an ineffective treatment. With this experimenter bias, it really, researchers, we all do it as well. There is implicit bias pretty much with anybody and everybody. Okay, we all try to not have that bias. But ultimately, there is some kind of bias when it comes to experimentation. You want your study to work. You want your experiment to work. You don't want to look like a boob in front of all of your peers and whatnot. So there is going to be some kind of experimenter bias sometimes with these studies. Double blind helps to eliminate that. Hey, you had a great hypothesis. You had a great test. You got great results. Did it work? Sometimes it doesn't. Okay, sometimes it doesn't. And that's really disheartening. But you know what? It's going to save you from looking like a fool when you inject a huge bunch of bias into your studies. And if you read a lot of studies out there, well, if you read a lot of studies expounded upon by influencers and whatnot, they will pick and choose the information that helps to shape their narrative. Is that a bias? Yeah, it's a bias. That's also the difficult aspect sometimes with trying to Ouija board what the hell you're reading when it comes to scientific studies. If you just take one line out and put it over here by itself, oh my gosh, this looks really damning. But if you put that one line back in the body of the text and read the whole body of the text, does it have a huge effect? No. And there are studies coming out of the yin yang, especially with nutrition, that look at like intermittent fasting. It's not the holy grail. For you intermittent fasters, that's fantastic. But it doesn't do all the stuff that you go to the mountaintop and proclaim. It just doesn't do it. It doesn't do it in any studies. It's not as any more effective as any other dietary device. Counting calories, whatever, insert your diet plan here. Okay. Same thing when it comes to a lot of different things. And I used to subscribe to some of these, but you start reading the research and read more research. And you're like, okay, one article is one article, but okay, now let's do a meta-analysis. And now there's like 15 articles, 15 different experiments, all showing no to this outcome. Okay, you got to start opening it up. And that's sometimes the difficult thing. A lot of great thing now when it comes to these research articles, they will do two different things. One, they will have a little discussion on research bias. They will tell who funded the experiment, who funded the study. That's fantastic. They usually require this now. And that wasn't the case, 15, 20 years ago even. So now you can kind of see who supplied the money to fund the outcome that the researcher came to. And then you could take it from there. You can truly see if their results, their conclusions were truly objective, were honest, were unbiased, and all that nonsense. And you can get a sense of where they're going with it when you look at the numbers and you look at the research and you look at the data. So it's a pretty cool thing now that they put that in there. Last thing, nothing that we're going to do, but follow up with more research. Like I mentioned earlier in the lecture, you read the lecture, you read the study, you're like, okay, I like that. But you know what they should have accounted for? They should have accounted for X. So now I'm going to take the similar study and try to copy it as much as I can, but now I'm going to equate for this one variable. And that's the great thing about nutritional research. Okay. It's constantly going on. People are always trying to find stuff and poke holes in it and find some way to be able to manipulate it to where it's in their fashion. So that's what happens with more and more and more research. That's why there's so much out there for you to look up when you're trying to find out, to do research on an article. You saw this thing in the news. You're like, okay, I want to do more about it, read more about it. Try to keep it current. And when you do that, that'll narrow your search, which is fantastic. But instead of having 10,000 research articles to go through, it'll give you maybe 500, which is a heck of a lot easier to do.